Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Well, it happened. Republicans thus filibustered the January 6th commission. And no surprise here. You knew it was coming. It's what they were going to do. They told you they were going to do it. They did everything in their power to make sure that they did it. In fact, Mitch McConnell begged and asked for personal favors. So this is who they are. This is what they are doing. And there is no surprise. The vote today was, 54-35. You got 6 Republicans to vote with all of the Democrats except for Kristen Sinema and Patty Murray, who did not vote. 6 Republicans: Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, Susan Collins of Maine, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Rob Portman of Ohio. I'm shocked. I found a spine for a moment. Mitt Romney of Utah and Ben Sasse of Nebraska. Our senator here, my senator here in Pennsylvania, Pat Toomey, did not vote. I guess stayed home. Had better thing, golfing maybe. Maybe putting new drapes on the new home once he leaves the Senate. The 11 senators who didn't vote, obviously, my senator, Pat Toomey, Tennessee's Marsha Blackwell, Missouri's Roy Blunt, Indiana's Mike Braun, North Carolina's Richard Burr, Oklahoma's James Inhofe, Mike Rounds of South Dakota, James Risch of Idaho, Richard Shelby of Alabama, and, of course, the 2 Democrats, Sinema and Murray, did not. That makes up the difference. Now, I looked at this, and my first thought is, I've been saying for a while, got to get rid of the filibuster. This has been the tool to end progress for decades. Time to get things moving. But I also, there are ways to, if the goal truly is to protect the minority from mob rule, how about you at least have to get 40 votes against it for it to actually be a filibuster, instead of saying, no, you've got to reach this super threshold of 60 senators, 6 and 10, to pass something. How about, in order to stop progress from going forward, how about maybe, just a thought, you have to at least have the 40 against it? Because if you have a bunch of people like this, we had 11 senators who abstained. You're going to tell me that 6 of those 11 couldn't find a soul or a conscience? And you assume the 2 Democrats would have moved it, the 56-35, which would have left 9 Republicans to come up with 4 votes. If we can't do that, to say, look, we want to investigate the most horrific incident in our capital's history, or at least the history that I've been witness to, you can't do that. There's a problem. Houston, we have a problem. Now, Joe Manchin, who is one of the, along with Kristen Sinema, who is one of the sticklers on the filibuster, he came out and said that, he was, it's unconscionable what the Republicans did. He said, choosing to put politics and political elections above the health of our democracy is unconscionable. And the betrayal of the oath we each took is something they will have to live with. Yeah, they're going to live with it because they've covered it up. Now, understand, and this is where, I know a lot on the left, and I know a lot of people in the center pretty ticked off at Republicans right now, because it seems like a no-brainer that we would want to know who led the insurrection. We would want to know what led to this moment in our history. We would want to know who funded it. We would want to know who organized it. We would want to know who pushed forward on it. We'd want to know the people who perpetrated it. You would think we would want to know. Answers, we don't. Or at least some of us don't. According to the most recent Yahoo News YouGov poll, 73% 73% of Republicans, people who identify as Republicans, they stake the flag in the ground. They blame the insurrection on January 6th, not on the people who actually did it, not the guy with the horns, and not the guy who defecated on the floor and leaked on the desks and stabbed the cop with the flag. Nope, that's not them. It's left-wing protesters trying to make Trump look bad because Antifa was there. Only they dressed up as old white people wearing MAGA hats. See, they say a lot of makeup. 38% of Republicans support the idea of a congressional investigation. 38%. So if you're putting your finger in the wind, like our political class does, if you're licking the finger and going, hey, which way's the wind blowing? Which way? You're pretty secure in knowing that if you vote against this, your base is going to be okay. Your base is going to vote for you. And if you do vote for it, and look, the fact that there were 6 Republicans that came forward and said, yeah, we want to vote for it. Now, look, none of the 6 on that list, other than Portman, who's leaving, really surprised me. These are people who weren't all the way in bed with Trump. They still had one foot on the floor. So I'm not really surprised, but this took some courage for them. Because back home, they're going to probably take something of a beating. Because the faithful, the GOP faithful, see the other narrative, the alternative fact. And their belief is, and I've had these conversations repeatedly with Republicans, it was Antifa who did it. Donald Trump is clean as the driven snow. The media has blown it out of proportion. The people who did it were crisis actors. It was all a false flag. The old, they're going to throw that trope out. It's mind-blowing. And then back to you do know, though, the election was stolen. Even though they can come up with no evidence, and they're trying, Arizona is trying for another week. Arizona is trying, I guess, as we speak, going through contract negotiations with a company, because the company in Pennsylvania who did the last recount says, we're done. They're in negotiations with another company to recount the recount because they didn't get what they wanted. They didn't get they didn't get to find 12,000 votes in the seat cushions like Trump wanted in Georgia. Little fact, Trump lost. Recount them all you want. Trump lost. And we're not even if you can rig the system to make it look like the guy at the airport playing 3-card monte, he's not going to be president. It's over. It's done. How about organizing on ideas and things that are going to move the country forward? But no, their goal here in this moment is, how do we rip things apart? How do we make people just insanely angry? How do we froth up the base? How do we get the guy to go down to his arsenal and ready to go take his Second Amendment to the streets? Isn't that what Matt Gaetz was talking about yesterday? Right? And you think about the tone-deaf response there, because they want what you saw on January 6th. They've encouraged this. They've poked the bear. They've hit the hornet's nest. And they repeatedly do it because they know the outcome they want. They want chaos. Chaos plays for them. People getting good jobs, having an infrastructure that's the world best, making sure families have health care, kids have clothes and educational opportunities. There's food that's not their interest. Their interest is power, and they get that through chaos. They get that through divide and conquer because they don't have any policy chops whatsoever. There's nothing there. And we saw that during the Trump years. The only thing they moved on, tax cuts for the rich. More welfare for corporations. That's it. That's where they blew their wad. Right there with the tax cuts. And they told you, this is all we really want. And I remember Trump saying, hey, I've got a trade plan. I've got a health care plan. Remember the health care plan we were going to repeal and replace? Remember that? They were going to have this incredible health care plan. It was going to cover everybody. It was going to be cheap, like $100. It was going to be incredible. It was going to be healthcare utopia. Everyone was going to get everything they wanted. It wasn't going to cost you a dime. It was great. It's what conservatives, it's what they believe is possible in their world, which is a very select few number of people who are allowed in, you and me not included. Kind of like the commercials, battery not included, some assembly required. This is one of those things. Decent lifestyle not included. You're going to have to pay for it. That's what's included. And what they've done is they've got people riled up to the point that rational thoughts out the window. When you get people who are somewhat some well-educated people going, I believe what Rudy Giuliani was saying, that there were all of these. There's so many looking for bamboo fibers and ballots. I mean, it's really gotten to this level of lunacy. And what's interesting to me, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday, is a lot of those people who were in that crowd, they spend their days with nothing better to do than, looking at YouTube with their mouth open, doing their research, and falling down these rabbit holes of conspiracy. And what these conspiracy theories, all of them have always done well, is they take that kernel of truth being that our life isn't as good as we thought it was going to be. That there are policies out there that are redistributing wealth from us to the very wealthy. That there are policies in place that are ruining our educational opportunities, that are doing all kinds of negative things. There's some truth to that. But it's not a secret cabal of baby blood drinking pedophiles and a global sex ring, somewhere on an island in the Bermuda Triangle. That's not it. And what's frustrating is we know these people. They're our friends. They're people we know. They're our relatives. I look at the shooting that happened the other day. And this, again, as I said, when this happened, I said, I may have known some of these people. I may have known some of them. When we went out to San Jose on our labor history tour, we met people from that ATU local out there. We had conversations with. We had people on the show, and it was kind of one of those moments. And I had tons of questions. There was initial talk of, there was a union hearing going to happen. There were, things going on. And my mind is spinning in a bunch of places. We now find out that this guy has been classified highly disgruntled for a very long time. In fact, as far back as 2016, the Department of Homeland Security, there's a memo that said that this is a guy who, highly disgruntled is what they called him, by officers of the Customs and Border Protection Agency, the folks who questioned him. Evidently, he had books on terrorism and fear and manifestos. Had a black memo book filled with all kinds of notes about how much he hates where he works. All kinds of stuff. But yet somehow we knew this guy and his anger level. Hates his job, hates everything. But when asked whether he hated his fellow workers, he said no, because of course he's not going to. Somehow he was able to get explosives and firearms and all kinds of stuff. And what they found after the fact, after he went in and shot 8 of his co-workers, discriminately, he walked through, and now we're finding out he walked through and he targeted certain people, walked by others and said, no, you're okay. Whereas the other, and chose who he was going to murder. They evidently found bomb-making stuff in his locker and 3 9mm handguns with 32 high-capacity magazines loaded with ammunition. What kind of damage could this guy have done? Now, how do you get that when, we already know that you're disgruntled. His ex-wife, said he talked about killing coworkers all the time, but we never thought much of it. Just blowing off a little steam. At some point, do you not question this stuff? Now, evidently, he was scheduled for a hearing because evidently he had some, who knows, disciplinary action, some coworker problems. I've heard some things that I can't verify, so I'm not going to throw them out, but it wouldn't be surprising. But here's a guy who came to work with, he had 2 pistols and 11 magazines of ammunition. He was ready to go. And I know, but Rick, it wasn't the gun's fault. But the gun made it a lot easier because guns kill people. That's what they're made for. And you look at this and you go, this guy was a disgruntled employee. Why did he stay? Why stay all these years? He was a disgruntled employee 5 years ago. Why did he stay? Reality, union job. Damn good wages, good health care, retirement security. The best job he was going to find. He knew he couldn't go anywhere else. He was trapped in that job. And I'm not making a victim out of him. The coward could have left. The murderer could have left. But this speaks volumes to, because I just said the other day, my grandfather had quit 3 jobs in one day. And someone reminded me of that. Hey, you remember when you talked about that? I go, yeah. He goes, that guy couldn't leave. He was trapped there. I'm going, yeah, I get that. But if you're that miserable, if you hate the people you work for that much and you work with that much, leave. Leave. There are other things. Could have joined the army. He had his own arsenal. So we're in this moment where you have a political party who's defending these kind of people, protecting these kind of people, because we can't do anything to address this. We can do nothing. We are powerless to do anything to protect ourselves because these folks, they are protecting the people who do it. And for me, look, at the end of the day, the January 6th Commission, what I wanted out of it was to find out who funded it all. Where did the money come from? Who paid for the buses? Who paid for these groups to exist? It's the money. Follow the money. That simple in my view. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back.
On the Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1863. That was the day the 54th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry marched through the streets of Boston in a farewell parade and then boarded ships headed for Beaufort, South Carolina. Thousands lined the streets for the send-off, including prominent abolitionists William Lloyd Garrison, Wendell Phillips, and Frederick Douglass. It was the first black regiment organized to fight in the Civil War. Abolitionists had wrestled with Lincoln and others that the Civil War wasn't just about preventing national disintegration, but about ending the slave labor system. They were emphatic that slaves and free black men had a right and a vested interest in fighting for their freedoms and the freedoms of their families. Finally, the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863 codified that demand as it abolished the slave system. The Union Army began accepting black enlistees and embarked on recruitment campaigns to enlist future black soldiers. By May, over 1,000 black men had enlisted from 24 states. Others came from as far away as Canada and the Caribbean. Fathers and sons enlisted together. The Union Army was far from free from its own anti-black prejudices. Secretary of War Edward Stanton determined white officers would lead all black regiments. Nonetheless, black enlisted men were trained, armed, and ready to fight. A young Colonel Robert Gould Shaw was put in charge of the regiment. Though Shaw and hundreds of troops would soon be killed in the Battle of Fort Wagner, the regiment forced the Confederacy to abandon the fort altogether. The Swamp Angels, as they were called, would continue to exact justice throughout the South for the duration of the war. They served as a model for other black regiments whose fighting proved decisive for victory. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So yesterday, the president was in my hometown of Cleveland, Ohio at Tri-C, the Cuyahoga Community College. Gave a speech, thought it was a good one. One of the things that jumped out at me, and I've said it a bunch of times, you got a bunch of Republicans taking credit for things that were in the Recovery Act, the rescue plan. He said, look, I'm not going to embarrass anyone. I have a list. If you're going to take credit for what we've done, don't get in the way of what we need to do. And I've been saying that for a while. Go ahead, take credit, but stop being the obstruction. We got lots of things that need to get done. We got roads and bridges and things to do. We've got an economy to save. We've got lots of work. Don't get in the way. You don't have to vote for it, but don't get in the way. Also today, the president rolled out his budget. Lots to get to, lots to talk about on that front. That's why I've asked Will Rice to come talk with us. Will is a policy consultant for the good folks over at Americans for Tax Fairness, their website, americansfortaxfairness.org. Will, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me.
So, big day today. Let's start real quick with the budget. The president rolled out his $6 trillion budget. Conservatives losing their ever-loving freaking minds.
Well, the thing to remember is, and even though I work with budgets and taxes, is we hear a lot of big numbers have been rolling out in succession. The president had an American Jobs Plan and then an American Families Plan. This budget is not in addition to that. This budget basically consolidates all those existing plans.
Right.
So it's not $6 trillion more in spending. It's just consolidating it into a single budget. Those earlier plans are all in there, and we have more details about them now, and we have more details about both the spending and the taxing side. So it's a useful thing, and it's great. It is a repudiation in a big way of 40 years of trickle down supply side economics that we've had ever since Ronald Reagan. It's saying, no, the way to build the middle class is not by giving more money to corporations and the rich. It's by investing in working communities and working families and taxing the wealthy and corporations to help pay for that.
I mean, the reality is in this budget, as I understand it, you're obviously the expert on this. This is as close to a balanced budget as we've had in a very, very long time.
It is. He's trying to do what Republicans often say they want done, which is to pay for things and not add to the deficit. It's not completely balanced, but he wants to spend on these important issues that he's been rolling out about infrastructure and a caregiving economy around a little over $4 trillion. And he's going to raise a little under $4 trillion to help pay for that. There are a lot of people who believe that, especially with interest rates so low, we shouldn't worry so much about the deficit, and there's certainly an argument to be made for that. But there's also an argument to be made for paying for a lot of this stuff by taxing the wealthy and corporations, because that only raises revenue, but it also shrinks these wide and widening income and wealth gaps in this country. Yeah. So there's multiple reasons to raise taxes on the rich.
And look, there's a lot of money out there. I talk to some of my conservative friends who say, we tax corporations too much. 21% is, oh my gosh, it's too much. As where, I'd like to see us go back to the Eisenhower years when it was 56%, but that's never going to happen. But, there was just a government survey released here recently that found of over 1,500 multinational corporations in 2018, the average tax rate was 7.8%, nowhere near the 21, certainly not near the 28 or that they're talking about going back to, and nowhere near the 35 that they said the sky was going to fall over, 7.8%.
Which is only about half what an average middle-class family pays in taxes. So it's really incredible. And last year, for 2020, all of us were suffering through the pandemic, there were 55 big corporations that paid zero income taxes, even as 500,000 Americans are dying, millions are losing their jobs, people are at risk of losing their homes, people are going hungry. And another thing that happened during the pandemic was that America's 650 billionaires increased their wealth. They didn't lose any money. They increased their collective wealth by over half, or $1.6 trillion. This is 650 people, individuals or families that whose wealth increased collectively by $1.6 trillion, which is a number most of us can't even conceive of what it means. But that's how rigged and off balance things are right now.
How many zeros is that?
1.6 trillion. I think
It's 11.
it's a lot. Is it 11? I was
It's a
going to
lot.
say 8. Yeah, it's a lot.
So it's a 1, a 6, and 11 zeros. That's a lot.
Right.
That's a huge number. But yet 650 people.
Yeah.
You could fit in a good sized room.
Sure.
That's what.
In a theater. Yeah.
That's
And
not their
more-
wealth. That's the additional wealth that they got in just 1 year.
Right. Their total wealth is well over $4 trillion, which would basically pay for a lot of what, for 2/3 of what President Biden wants to do for the American people, for working families and working communities.
And the reason I
like
bring
you
that
say,
up.
there's plenty of money out there.
Yep. And the reason I bring that up is because you have the Trump supporters saying, we need to make America great like it was back in the old days, because we're pining for the 1950s. Only we don't want the strong unions, the high tax rates on the very wealthy, and the high tax rates on corporate America. No, we just want the other stuff where those people were in their place. We were a highly segregated, highly hate-filled society. No, we want that, but not the prosperity, which seems just bizarre to me.
It is. And I think this is what President Biden's election, because he ran very strongly on this issue of raising taxes on the wealthy and corporations. He didn't hide it. He had it right up front. His election spells a mandate for returning at least partially to those days. And this budget that he released today is one more step towards that. And the people do want it. Polling shows consistently, and has for many years, and continues to show, that Democrats or independents and Republicans all want the rich and corporations to pay more of their fair share of taxes. And when people hear about Biden's spending plans, they're usually in favor of it. When they're told that it's going to be paid for by higher taxes on the rich, their approval always goes up.
Yep. No, and that's one of those things I think is really important to point out. Because, at the end of the day, having 650 people who are worth the amount that they're worth is not good for democracy. We all complain about lobbyists, getting more for the wealthy and more for corporations. This is how we rein some of that back in.
Absolutely. It's a top-heavy economy is an unstable economy, and it's corrosive of our politics and of our democracy. It's basically idle funds. It's stagnant wealth that could be circulating through the economy, much as President Biden wants to do now by taxing some of it and investing it in people and jobs and the economy that the real people live in.
So let's talk about today. The Republicans came out kind of with their plan, I guess, the GOP infrastructure plan that Shelley Moore Capito is a part of. You guys are saying that it's missing a whole bunch. Look, the Republicans just want to pave the streets so that the potholes get done, so people get off their back. They want the bridges to stop collapsing. That's what they want. But all of those other investments, like in healthcare for seniors, or for child early development and pre-K, and those can't have that. That's like socialism.
They don't even want all the brick and mortar things that Biden wants. They don't want to do any. They don't want to build schools. They don't want to repair VA hospitals. They don't want to build housing when we have a genuine housing crisis in this country. So it's not just touchy-feely things they're objecting to. They don't. There's stuff that most people would think of as infrastructure. They don't even want to do that. So it really was a bad faith counteroffer by them. They headlined as almost $1 trillion. But it was phony accounting, because a lot of the only about $250 billion of that was actually new spending. The rest of it was money that they'd already authorized. They just passed a big water bill, and there's a highway bill that's coming up that's done every few years. So Biden's talking about actual new spending. A lot of what the Republicans are talking about wasn't. So Biden came down by $500 billion from his original offer, and they basically, in terms of new spending, went up by only a minuscule amount.
Yeah, and look, at the end of the day, what they're doing is robbing Peter to pay Paul, so that there's the illusion that they're actually doing something, and it's not. And for me, this comes back down to politics. Will, at the end of the day, they can't give Biden and the Democrats a win, because look, a massive infrastructure bill like this, the kind of jolt to the economy that this is going to be, it's going to be good for workers, it's going to be good for small businesses, it's going to be good for communities, it's going to be that jolt that this economy needs to get moving in the right direction. And they know if that happens, their chances in 2022 are going to be less. So they're going to gridlock, they're going to delay, they're going to bad faith negotiate, like I think this is, so that they can run out the clock. And even if we do get something in the fall, it's not going to take effect until the following year.
Even Wall Street knows it's good for the economy. So, I mean, everyone's for it, basically, except for the Republicans in Congress. Wall Street analysts consistently say the tax increases that Biden wants to do on corporations and on wealthy investors will have very little effect, especially in light of the fact there's going to be all this money being pumped into the real economy and things being built and demand going up, and consumers having more money with which to buy. So even the Republican Party's backers on Wall Street think Biden's idea is a good one.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot more money for them. And look, I have a friend who was an economist years ago said, you give me $20,000 in a tax cut, I'm going to go on vacation. You give me $20,000 worth of demand and customers coming through my door, I'm going to figure out how to hire people and meet that demand so I can make that money back. And this is what we need to be doing. It seems like common sense economics, but yet here we are in this polar divide that, maybe you have a better idea than I do. Was it always this divided? I've got friends who were, in Congress years ago, and they said, these infrastructure bills were kind of like yawn votes. We all knew we were going to bring something back home. We all knew we were going to have to get to go to the ribbon cuttings and slap names on and get our name in the local paper about what we brought home to the district. It was good for re-election. When did that all stop?
Well, like you say, it's just become a bitter partisan battle over every inch of ground, and the Republicans are just hoping that if they can stall this out, it'll make Biden look bad. We won't have the kind of huge bounce that we would almost certainly have from this kind of spending and investment, and that will help them next fall. But they really are almost an island of opposition because their voters want this, Wall Street wants it, the Chamber of Commerce wants it. Just at least on the spending side, and the American people want that to be paired with higher taxes on the wealthy and corporations, and Wall Street doesn't care because they know that on balance they'll do better. So it's a partisan thing and it's an ideological thing. Ever since Reagan, it's an article of faith that Republicans don't raise taxes, even on people who are enormously wealthy, even on corporations that makes billions of dollars in profits and pay no taxes. They're going to cling to that.
Yeah.
And I hope that the next election proves that that's a bad thing to cling to.
Yeah, well, no, they've all taken the Grover Norquist pledge to never raise taxes ever, 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 not even clinically, and they're sticking to it. But they'll raise fees, which I got to tell you, a little surprised that this plan kind of backed off on the user fees. I always point out that Mitt Romney was governor of Massachusetts, never raised taxes. Raised fees like 500 times, but never raised official taxes, just those things that working people pay.
I think they must have done some polling. And when they asked people in the polls, would you rather pay for infrastructure or paying higher gas tax on your commute to work, or asking corporations and billionaires to pay higher income taxes, I think you could imagine what the response was. So I think they had to run away from gas taxes. They may go back to them, but I just think that they realized that was as bad a position as they're in. That was an even worse position.
No, I mean, because it seems like a no-brainer. You have, you see these stories, like you pointed out, 650 billionaires pocketed an additional $1.7 trillion last year alone. Their wealth is over $4 trillion. And you got the average working class person who's worried about paying the rent. Food prices are going up. They're worried about, getting shoes for the kids, all the pressures of life. And it's a no-brainer. The guy who's, the Jeff Bezos who's building a $500 million boat, maybe he could afford to pay a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been growing for a long time, and it's a very strong public opinion. That's why I say it's a shrinking island of opinion just Grover Norquist's office and the Republican headquarters is the only two places where people don't think that the rich and corporations should be paying more taxes, because everyone, MAGA people, Trump supporters think the rich should be and corporations should be paying more in taxes. I mean, it's almost a universal opinion. The Democrats just have to stick to that, keep pushing it, because it's not only good policy, good economics, it's great politics. Yeah. And they've just been in a defensive crouch for so many decades on the issue of taxes and spending that a lot of them are still very gun shy. But if all of us can let them know, look, everyone's on your side on this one. You just have to keep leaning into it.
Now, how long does Biden play this charade of pretending like the Republicans are going to negotiate in good faith? I mean, if we learned anything from the Obamacare fight, we learned that no matter what they offer, they're still, even if you give them everything they want, they're still never going to vote for it. How long does he put up with this charade?
Well, I'm not a political analyst, but I will say I did hear from someone who lobbies for us that this is really more for moderate Democrats. It's for Joe Manchin, it's for Sinema. They don't expect to get Republican votes. So they want to be able to go back to those wavering moderate Democrats and say, look, we tried. Because Manchin apparently has said he definitely wants that to happen. So I think they're clear-headed about it. They know they're not going to get any Republican votes, but they have to put in a sufficient performance to make these more conservative Democrats more comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, because at the end of the day, you've got to get this done. Right. Rick Wilson, the Republican strategist, has said something and got some attention for something I've said 1,000 times on this show, is that if you've got the power, you've got to use it or you're going to lose it. If they've got the keys to the steamroller right now, run the damn thing down the road.
Absolutely. And everyone's going to be cheering for them. They're just going to get more popular because it's what people want.
Because at the end of the day, this is about jobs. This is about putting people back to work. And as you know as well as anyone, people vote about how they're doing economically at the time that it's time to go to the polls.
Right. And with corporations paying zero taxes despite billions of dollars in profits and billionaires increasing their wealth by half, everyone's fed up with this. And there's a clear answer, and Biden has articulated it, and he just needs to keep pressing it.
Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. And we talked about the story yesterday, 55 companies. Not only did they pay nothing, but over the 3-year period, some of them we actually paid. We actually gave money to. And I'm going, how is that possible? How do I get that gig? Please pay me.
Yeah, they got, and Biden addresses a lot of that with his proposals. Not only is he raising the corporate tax rate halfway back to where it was before Trump, but he's also trying to curb a lot of that offshore tax dodging that corporations do. Stuff
we absolutely need. But Will, I appreciate the time, the thoughts, good information. Keep up the great work there at Americans for Tax Fairness. So folks will check out the website, americansfortaxfairness.org. Will Rice, thanks so much, man.
Thank you so much for having me.
Anytime. Good stuff. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1882. That was the day that John Muir, a Scottish-American conservationist, founded the Sierra Club in San Francisco, California. The Sierra Club's purpose was to explore, enjoy, and protect the wild places of the earth. Today, the organization has more than 1 million members and is one of the most well-known environmental organizations on the planet. The labor movement and the environmental movements in the United States have not always had an easy relationship. Too often, politicians and the media have framed policy decisions as a choice between good jobs and a clean environment. But during the 1990s, some environmentalists and unionists began to break down this divide. Both groups opposed the North American Free Trade Agreement, arguing it would have a negative impact on both jobs and the environment. During the massive protests of the World Trade Organization in 1999 in Seattle, labor protested alongside environmental activists. One memorable tagline to come out of the protest was, "Turtles love Teamsters, Teamsters love turtles." Then, in 2006, the Sierra Club partnered with the United Steelworkers to launch the Blue-Green Alliance. The effort joins together blue-collar workers with green environmental justice groups. The partnership seeks to supply policy and education about sustainable job growth in fields such as clean energy. Multiple environmental groups and unions, including the American Federation of Teachers, the Communication Workers of America, the Service Employees International Union, and the United Auto Workers, have signed on to the effort. But it's not always easy to keep the two causes united. In 2012, the Laborers Union left the alliance due to disagreements over the Keystone XL pipeline. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So according to data analyzed by Equilar, I guess it's pronounced, for the good folks at the AP, median CEO pay jumped 5% to $12.7 million in 2020. Nice little boost, nice little 5% boost during a global pandemic, during one of the worst years on record for big business. But hey, we need to keep good talent. We need to keep people in their jobs, good people. We need to retain the CEOs in these tough days. Now, those working people, screw them. We can shame them back to work after we make them feel bad because they got an extra couple $100. But up to $12.7 million. Nice gig, I guess, if you can get it. Now, I've got everyone screaming at me because Joe Biden's causing the world to end. We're gonna have inflation, mass inflation. Joe Biden has caused this all by himself, and here to share some thoughts on: are we going to see mass inflation? Is it the 70s again? I've asked our good friend Pedro Costa to come talk with us. Pedro's the Federal Reserve and Economy correspondent for Market News International. Pedro, thanks for taking time for us.
My pleasure, Rick. How are you?
I am good. So is it the end of the world? Is inflation, are we going to have, are we Zimbabwe yet? Is that going to happen?
It's the end of the world as we know it, and I feel fine. No, it's not the end of the world. It's not the 1970s, surely. I wasn't, my memories aren't that fresh from the 70s. I was born in 76, but I did live through the hyperinflation in Brazil in the 80s, so I do have some experience with that. And I think, the fears are understandable to a certain extent, because basically we went from an economy that was falling off a cliff to one that actually had a fairly measured and healthy response by all kind of economists' accounts. Was, a response that involved both a monetary reaction from the Fed and a fiscal policy reaction from the Biden administration. So there was a response to the pandemic that led to essentially that took out the recession fears. And now that there's a recovery, there's a concern that with all this spending, inflation might be coming down the pipeline. Now, the issue is that now we're getting a couple months of inflation numbers that are being compared to last year when we were in the depths of the downturn. So these numbers really aren't comparable, and they kind of send false alarms. So people will have to watch many more months to see whether there are any signs of actual inflation that is more persistent and prolonged. But for now, there isn't anything like that on the horizon.
But I'm constantly hit with Pedro. When the former guy was president, I was paying $1.90 for gas. Joe Biden's president, and he raised it to $3.90. And I'm going, I don't know where you saw either one of those prices. Here, I haven't seen it. But keep up with the narrative. Keep it up. Someone might buy it.
So it's interesting because I actually hadn't noticed the politicization of, we're living in different worlds these days, but I hadn't seen the politicization of the inflation story. Although there has been a lot of Republican pushback, right, against Janet Yellen when she testifies, and the fears of inflation have been raised by Republican lawmakers. But the concerns in the economics community are actually fairly widespread, and they include some fairly centrist economists, including former Obama officials like Jason Furman, fairly centrist economists like Olivier Blanchard. So there are some concerns out there, but again, I think you'd need to see a lot more traction in the labor market. And at least in our experience in the United States, you have to get a lot more traction in the labor market to see enough wage growth to get the kind of inflation that would be of concern to the Fed.
Yeah, but one of the things that you're hearing people talk about is, we have this labor shortage. I'm sure you may have heard about it. We have all these lazy people who don't want to work because Joe Biden's giving them an extra $300 a week. We can't get people to work in crummy jobs again. They're not coming back to the minimum wage gigs or the hospitality gigs that are rife with sexual harassment and in poverty wages and tough working conditions, because people have an option. And those wages are going up. So some of the concern that I've seen is, we're killing small business with inflation because they can't find people to work for minimum wage.
One of the things I'll say about labor shortages is you can find businesses complaining about labor shortages at any point in the business cycle. So that complaint is usually a red herring. Now, we might be at a time where the economy is moving so quickly. So if the economy is actually growing 8 to 10% this quarter, which it might be because it's coming out of such a deep hole, it could be that it's just logistically that difficult to get that many kind of people in the door and forms signed, et cetera, et cetera. So the notion of a labor shortage seems to me facetious, unless it lasts for a prolonged period. The notion that 1 month, the fact that we had a 1 month disappointing number, say, in the labor market, doesn't make a labor shortage. And in fact, you would have to see, again, much more significant signs of wage pressures before you could call it something like a labor shortage.
And we really haven't seen that pressure. And I've argued for a very long time, a little inflation wouldn't be a bad thing, especially if you're talking about wages going up, because we haven't had that wage growth in decades. We desperately need a little wage growth.
That's the bet that the Fed is making. And the fear is that the Fed is fighting the last war. So they had a last recession. It was a very deep one. It took us a long time to recover. The notion is that this time the recovery is going to be more quick, and the recession was more shallow, in part because we had a much more proactive response, especially on the fiscal side. And so, there is a concern that inflation might be out there. But again, there is little sign so far that wage pressures are about to take off.
Now, you hear a lot of people talk about it. Inflation's bad all across the board. Inflation's not rapid, enormous inflation is bad, but some inflation is good for people. I mean, I go back and I think about, my grandparents who, in the 1960s, they bought a house for 18 grand. And by the middle 70s, their house payment was literally a day's pay.
It's a mixed phenomenon, as you say. And it's the housing market is an interesting phenomenon, right? Because right now, one of the issues with Fed policy and one of the concerns is that inflation might be showing up in places other than the CPI. So you have house price inflation as an example. And of course, home price appreciation favors those who already own, but it's also alienating some Gen Xers and Gen Zers who might not be able to afford the new higher entry point. And so it's a mixed picture, but the idea is that the Fed and the Congress are trying to stimulate the economy enough to dig us out of what is really a historic hole. So for now, the notion that we are anywhere near the limit of our productive capacity, which is the point after which we start to generate serious inflation, I think we're still a long way from that. And the Fed is betting that it has enough headway to see it before it's coming. The fear is that the Fed has kind of changed regimes at a time where inflation is going to come so quickly that it'll be too late for the Fed to kind of nip it in the bud. And in that case, the Fed might have to raise rates so quickly that it would push the economy into recession. Now, I think that fear is still, far off into the future, and we'll have to see what happens. You have to remember, we're still 8.5 million jobs short of where we were pre-pandemic, and that doesn't include the employment growth that should have taken place had the economy expanded at its normal pace. So.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting to me is, I'm sure you've been paying attention as well, as we open up and as there's more jobs, we're struggling. Part of, you said a moment ago, a lot of it you think is frictional, getting people into those jobs, filling out the paperwork, getting things back to moving. This is where I think, and I've always said, this is where the entertainment is going to come in as we come out of our shells and back into going, oh, you want to be here too, and how we figure out how to deal with each other. Because it's been kind of interesting to this point, watching how the reopening has unfolded.
Absolutely. I've also found it fascinating to watch on TV, especially on the financial networks. There's a shift from like we're going to go back into a hybrid world to like, I think there's a lot of pressure from CEOs for people to get back into the office. So like now suddenly there's this chorus about how you need to be in the office to create the right culture. And if one person's in the office and the other isn't, it's going to create all kind of competitive pressures that people won't be able to align with. So that'll be really interesting to see as well. How people go back in that way and where they go back to work in. One of the things that fascinates me is kind of location, right? So when I go back to downtown DC, it's not the same downtown DC because people aren't working in the same places. So places just look different. There are parts of town that are still boarded up from the protests. And so I don't know, normalcy might not look as normal as we think.
Yeah, but I have this belief that eventually we'll get back to normal. I mean, things will fill those spaces where there's opportunity. People will move. It comes down, for at least for me, to the idea that you create an environment through policy where people can move back into those spaces and thrive. I'm very optimistic about where we can go from here.
Absolutely, and that's kind of so inflation is kind of the flip side of the optimism, right? The fact that it's a luxury for us to have an inflation fear right after such a deep downturn, right? We would have been worried about a depression, about disinflation, but the policy reaction was so aggressive in a positive way that we are now talking about inflation concerns. So that's kind of a luxury. So the fear is that all this quote unquote pent up savings that, is definitely tilted toward the wealthy. But the wealth accumulation that's taken place through this pandemic, especially at the top, might unleash some big spurt of growth that would then lead to inflation. But you have also on the flip side, the tendency for people to remain reluctant after such a shocking event as a pandemic, to kind of not know what the next thing is around the corner, and therefore to maybe become more likely to save than they otherwise would have. And that would argue against the inflation story.
My history major friend reminded me that after the last global pandemic, over 100 years ago, we did go through a decade of rapid growth. The roaring 20s came around, and he's predicting another roaring 20s. He said the next 10 years are going to be just joy on wheels.
There's a lot of that on Wall Street, although if these are the roaring 20s, the stock market is entering it looking pretty bubbly already. It looks like we're a lot closer to 29 than we were, say, in 1920, and that's kind of my concern about where policy goes, not so much about the inflation front, but you do kind of see bubbles everywhere you look as far as asset prices. And that, when those pop, they can have, as we saw in the last recession, they can have really long lasting and deep consequences for a lot of people. So that's something that I do watch. But
and this is where I go back to wanting to see a much higher corporate tax rate and much higher taxes on the wealthy, so we can weather those storms by having a little rainy day money.
So there's a lot of policy ideas that that potentially, one of the concerns is that the Fed has actually loosened banking regulations and leverage rules at a time when where economic activity is picking up. So that could arguably be pro-cyclical. But, you're talking about corporate taxes. There's also financial transactions taxes that would kind of limit the amount of leverage in the system by taxing people who are trading more. There's, many ways to regulate the financial system if you want to, but there seems to be a lack of desire. And, there's something about American capitalism that kind of is freewheeling. That's kind of its charm and its peril. So
yeah, I actually had someone send me an article of a guy from George Mason University saying inequality is a good thing. We need inequality in America. We need uber wealthy people, and we need really massive inequality, because that's what draws people to come here. And I'm going, yeah, that's exactly why people come here. The inequality.
That reminds me of a quote that I think is if it's not Keynes, it's another, dead white guy, but it's a quote about how economic insecurity is sort of an attribute best discussed in the second person. And that's what that reminds me of, right? That, the notion that inequality is good for everyone is probably not held by the person that's the victim of inequality. So
Yeah, it's well, it'll be interesting to see where this all goes. Last bit of questioning. Holiday weekend coming up. Got any big plans?
not really, and not yet.
Nothing?
We're still in the tether of Washington, D.C. We got beach plans for later on, as we discussed before, but not just yet.
Yeah, because I'm curious at how people are reopening and look, the economy's one thing, but in our personal lives, getting back to some bit of normal. When like my wife and I are debating, when do we get to go back for breakfast? One of those things we used to do, don't do it anymore. When do we get to go to the diner and have breakfast? That's our big thing.
Yeah, for us, we have small girls who are not vaccinated yet, so it's kind of like that in between,
Yeah, I mean, so I'm curious how people are planning, their vacations, because everybody else is going to be there too. You said you're going to the beach. Literally everybody's going to be there.
It's going to be tough. It's going to be like Rio de Janeiro on a Friday.
I've never been there, but I've seen pictures.
It's nice, but sometimes it's way too full.
Yeah, because have you seen some of these stories of just people we don't seem to. I guess we've forgotten how to be around other people.
Oh, absolutely. I think I know. I don't know that I had much social tact before, but I certainly lost a lot of it for now.
Well, I guess that's all part of it. I guess last question I've got for you, I got to go back to this real quick. Because the inflation thing, someone just sent me a message saying that lumber is up, $3,200 a board foot. I don't know where he's getting these numbers, but this view that all the prices have gone up, we've got shortages in some of this stuff, right?
That's correct, and that's and that is the concern that these shortages. So these shortages are kind of predictable effects of coming out of a pandemic where parts of the economy were shut down completely. Now, if they last for a prolonged period, they last for 6 months and prices keep going through the roof, then inflation might become a true concern. For now, these are kind of things that the economy is likely to adjust to. So it doesn't appear to be anything permanent at the moment.
Yeah, because there's part of me when I respond to this, I go, I don't know how much of it is a true shortage and how much of it is just opportunist industries going, hey, this is a great time to jack up our prices and jack up our profits, and because we can gouge people. The sheet of plywood, and I'll be honest, the sheet of plywood's like $65 now, as where before it was like $45. How much of that is it's harder to get plywood into the stores because we got stuff going on? How much of it is, hey, this is just a good time to raise prices?
Well, I think with lumber, it's fairly real because of the housing issue. As I mentioned, we have so much construction because people were literally stuck in their homes and improving and upsizing and sort of, and so that sector is definitely hot. And so it's something to watch. I wouldn't write it off. Again, I'm not writing off the concerns. I'm just saying it's not, it's
exactly
not
what my
our
economist
worst nightmare. The worst nightmare would be for us to be in a depression still with 10 million more people unemployed.
No, I'm right there with you. But Pedro, always great talk with you, my friend. I'll have a great weekend. I look forward to talking to you again.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Good stuff. Pedro da Costa. He is the Federal Reserve and economy correspondent there at Market News International. We'll get links out on how you can take a look at some of his work. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1946. That was the day the working people of New York stood up in true labor solidarity. It all started at the stroke of midnight on May 15th, as messengers delivered the following statement to 489 municipal employees. This is to advise you that the position you held in the Department of Public Works has been abolished by the city manager, and your services with the city of Rochester are terminated as of midnight this date. This action is the result of a change of policy deemed necessary to protect public interest. What was the workers' so-called act against public interest? Trying to form a union. Earlier Earlier that May, city workers had founded the Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, Local 871, as part of the AFL. The next day, 500 city workers crowded into the Carpenters Hall to figure out what to do next. Teamsters Locals 118 and 398 pledged their support. The area labor councils of both the AFL and CIO met to plan their response. On May 20th, labor called for a public protest and 24-hour-a-day pickets of the Department of Public Works. The next day, 54 picketers were arrested. Finally, at 3 a.m. on this day in labor history, a citywide general strike was declared. Newspaper presses fell silent and buses did not run. More than 13,000 members of the Amalgamated Clothing Workers Union walked off the job. In all, more than 30,000 workers joined the strike. After one day, the city gave in. They agreed to reinstate the fired workers and recognize their right to form a union. Today, public unions are again under attack, and labor solidarity is more important than ever. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
The Agriculture Commissioner of Texas, Sid Miller, is the one top official in our state willing to take a bold stand against racial discrimination. Miller proudly went to court in April, challenging a new government program that he considered discriminatory against a particular group of disadvantaged agricultural producers, namely his group, white farmers and ranchers. Yes, Sid asserts that the program, which directs some long overdue loan relief to Black, Latino, Native American, and other food producers who've been grossly discriminated against for generations by agricultural lenders, amounts to reverse discrimination against privileged whites like him. So Sid, a rancher and former rodeo performer, is braying and snorting through his big white cowboy hat that the way to stop racial discrimination is to let white discriminators also get anti-discrimination money from the feds. That's what passes for logic when you're wearing a $1,000 hat like Sid struts around in. But, as a real cowboy once told me, it ain't the hat, it's the head. And right there is Miller's problem. He's got a $1,000 hat on a 10-cent head. However, he's not the actual thinker behind this screwball legal claim. That distinction goes to another Miller, one named Stephen. He's a Trump political operative, anti-immigrant extremist, and a fanatical promoter of white nationalism, one who specializes in frivolous lawsuits. Indeed, Stephen wrote Sid's plaintive legal plea to provide racial justice for rich and powerful white ranchers like him. This is Jim Hightower saying, you'd think this ridiculous bigotry would be laughed out of court, but the case has gone to a hyper-partisan right-wing judge who's backed Republican legal ploys in the past. So yippee-ki-yi-yo, off to another right-wing rodeo we go. The Hightower Radio Lowdown is brought to you by the Lowdown Happy Hour, live streamed from the Chat and Chew Cafe. Details at hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So yesterday, kind of sad news. Look, I don't want to see anyone lose their job, but Joe Walsh's show evidently was canceled, evidently because he's not a Trump supporter. And, for me, this is one of those moments where you go, right-wing radio has always been political theater, the puppet masters who pull the strings. You either dance along to the music or you're out. And this is another one of those moments that this is, you don't dance to the tune of Trump. There's the door. And here to share some thoughts on this and, maybe find out what Joe's up to next and how we can promote what he's doing next. Investor, our good friend Joe Walsh, former Illinois congressman, Republican presidential candidate, and, person that I was, really opposed to for a period of time. Joe, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, good to be with you. I hope I sound okay. I'm on the road right now.
So let me ask you this. Was it the Trump, the anti-Trump stuff? Was that the reason? Did they put that in writing? Did you get that this is why we're firing you?
No. I showed up at the studio one day, Rick, about 2 weeks ago, and the show was done. So, no, they didn't say anything. What I knew is this. The ownership team, they're big Trump people. I've been on their network for a year, and they've been dying to get me off for a year. They hate the fact that I'm anti-Trump. Look, I'm not a victim, Rick. This isn't cancel culture. You and I have talked about this. I was a lifelong Republican. I'm done as a Republican because if you want to be a successful Republican, you got to make love to Donald Trump every day. It's the same thing in conservative talk radio. And I can't do that, and I won't do that. So there's no place for me there.
No, I'm not making you out to be a victim. What I'm trying to expose is the fact that, because I get this all the time, doing the kind of program that I do, being anti-Trump, and anti-conservative on a lot of veins. I get people going, well, you're only on 20 stations. You're not everywhere like Rush Limbaugh, 1,500 stations. It's because people don't want to hear what you have to say. And I said, no, what we have is a system of ownership where talk radio is dominated by a particular type of issue. And what's going on with you is, to me, is right in that same vein.
Rick, absolutely. Again, and this isn't the first time this has happened. I was on almost a couple hundred stations 3.5, 4 years ago, and then I came out and publicly opposed Trump, and the company that syndicated me, Salem Media, basically took my radio show away. So this is the second time it's happened. I understand it. Conservative talk radio, and I'm a conservative. Conservative talk radio right now, you have to embrace Donald Trump. If you don't, there's no future there. I get it. It makes me sad, but it is what it is.
So what does that mean for the rest of them then? I mean, because at the end of the day, I keep telling my Teamster buddies who listen to nothing but the slew of Beck and the rest of them who are kind of in the lines, that this isn't really what the people want. It's what the corporate interests want. This is what the powers to be present to us. It's political theater.
Well, it is, but then I don't know. Chicken and egg, Rick. I don't know. Look, the audience, the conservative talk radio audience, believes the election was stolen. They don't believe Joe Biden won fair and square. They don't believe January 6th was that big of a deal. And so what's going to happen is, and look what the Republicans in Congress are doing. What's going to happen is these 40 to 50 to 60 to 70 million people who listen to conservative talk and they watch Fox News, they're going to be continued to fed these lies. It makes me sad, Rick, because I was the only one in conservative talk radio that pushed back against all of these lies.
Right. No, and this you say it's the chicken and egg. No, it's talk radio came and basically trained a generation to regurgitate these talking points. They've done a masterful job. I watched it happen back in the late 80s, early 90s as AM talk radio was becoming right-wing talk centric. I watched it happen in lunchrooms and everywhere I worked, where you would have the one guy, I heard something, because people want to know something. And the changeover happened. I give the moneyed interests who funded all of that, I give them credit for staying power. I give them credit for vision. They did a masterful job.
Rush Limbaugh made a life out of lying to and manipulating and feeding the grievances of his audience.
Yep.
And Rick, you and I have spoke before. Look, I've been in this business now for 6 years, ever since I left Congress. I dabbled in a little bit of that before Trump. Once Trump came along, it was a whole different ballgame. And I know you and I may differ on this. The level of lying and conspiracy mongering post-Trump just went to another level. And I pushed back against that, but nobody else did because you want to keep your gig.
No, we don't disagree on that. I mean, Trump forward, things have just accelerated. I mean, what he had done, and this is where I guess one way or another you can give him credit for it or blame him for it. He gave, and you can disagree with this, and maybe you will. He gave people on your side, at that side of the aisle, since you're no longer there, license to go as far as they wanted. He gave them the ability to come out and say, "Yeah, damn it, you're right. This is what I'm a patriot, and I'm, whatever you racist, whatever you want to throw out there." I'm staking my flag in the ground.
But Rick, here's the problem. Nobody is telling these people the truth. I mean, I tried to go back at it, and I was only on in a few markets, and Most markets didn't want to pick me up because the first question out of the gate was, "Oh, you're Joe Walsh. You're opposed to Trump. Are you going to stay that way?" And I said, "I'm always going to speak my truth." So I was having a tough time growing the show. But the problem is then nobody is out there telling all of these, really telling the Republican base the truth. And right now this base is radicalized, and we're seeing that play out.
Is there any hope on this front? I mean, one of the things that we've done here on the program is we've gone over to this center-right leaning platform, ThinkSpot, and we do a program over there. We try and engage with the people, and we've had moderate levels of success. Our numbers have grown and all of that stuff. Is there any hope? I mean, because there are very few people reaching across the aisle, I think, from either side. I think we're in our polar opposite corners, just throwing stuff at each other.
No, and so look, you and I have talked before, Rick. This country, I believe, is as divided as it's been since the Civil War. And Trump didn't create the divide, by the way. He's an ugly byproduct of the divide.
Right.
We are super tribal. We only talk to and listen to people who think like we do. And that's a real problem. Somehow we got to get Joe Walsh's and Rick Smith's. I wish you and I had a platform of a few million people every night where you and I could have interesting, tough, respectful conversations about issues. Nobody, Rick, is doing that.
No, we're all in our camps, and that scares me. And it seems we're going further and further and further. I look at Matt Gaetz's speech last night.
Yeah.
And do you not know we just came out of we just came out of one of the worst moments in our country's history on January 6th, and you're yelling about the Second Amendment is about the citizens' ability to have an armed insurrection and overthrow our government. Kind of the wrong message at this moment, but I guess exactly what the base, because they gave him a standing ovation, what they want to hear. They want that blood. That bloodlust is real.
Matt Gaetz could beat Paul Ryan in any Republican primary right now. He could beat Mitt Romney. He could beat Liz Cheney. He could beat me. I mean, right now, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz and Donald Trump, look, that is the Republican Party. There's no difference between Marjorie Taylor Greene and Donald Trump. When Republicans privately get mad at me about Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's just like Donald Trump, and Trump's the leader of the party.
Right.
So that's where they are now.
Yeah, I said yesterday, it's going to be Gaetz Green 2024. That's going to be the GOP ticket.
He's in real legal trouble, though. He could be in real jeopardy.
Well, I think he's going to do it from prison.
Well, Trump would. Trump could easily get the nomination even after he's indicted. I mean that.
Really? You think, here's where my mind is, and I don't disagree with you, because even if he is convicted, that will just make him a martyr and probably even more popular.
His support, and he will use this, he will use his potential indictment as a reason to run again. And I've spoken, Rick, to people who are close to people who are in his inner circle. Donald Trump is dying to run again. He really wants to run again. And I think he will.
No, I think he will, too. As long as his health holds up, I absolutely think he will.
Absolutely.
Because he's got that ego. There's just no way he's going to go out a loser.
I agree. I agree. And look, the Democrats have their issues. Let's hope that Biden and Kamala Harris can keep it together and hopefully get an infrastructure bill passed. And that's probably all they're going to be able to get passed.
Yeah.
And then, fight these Republicans. And I'll tell you what, Rick, what the Republicans did yesterday, I mean, our government was attacked, and Republicans don't want that investigated. Think about that.
No, I mean, they're covering for someone, and who is that?
They're covering not just Trump, Rick. They're covering for Republicans. The truth is, all Republicans, damn near all of them, incited what happened on January 6th. They don't want any of that to come out.
Yeah. And also for me, and I've been saying this from the beginning, I want to know who funded all of this. I want to know the woman from Publix who paid Alex Jones $300,000 to do whatever it is that he did. I want to know the people who chartered the buses and funded these right-wing hate groups. I want to know that. That needs to be front and center in my view.
I agree. I agree. But remember, the problem is Donald Trump began lying about a stolen election about a year ago. I mean, he was lying about it in the summer of 2020, months before the election took place.
Joe, he was lying about a stolen election back in 2015.
I agree. He primed the pump for this. People like go after his speech on the morning of January 6th. Bullcrap. That wasn't what did it. It was month after month after month of telling his supporters that the election was going to be stolen, and they were ready. And everybody on Fox News and talk radio echoed that crap.
And this is where I come back to, look, we don't agree on a lot of issues, and I'm sure we would have, many disagreements. But to me, the media consolidation that's happened, Clinton telecom bill of 96 forward, where you have, a handful of people controlling our media, to where people like you and me can't get on, different stations because of, they're all formatted. Something has to change. And I'm curious, do you see any possibility of that? Is it too far gone? And for yourself, are you looking at, because there are other platforms, there's internet stuff. Are you looking at continuing your program in that vein as well?
I really, Rick, wanted to give talk radio one more shot. It's clear to me now that in conservative talk, if you're anti-Trump, you just can't do it. So I'll look at, again, the internet, podcasting, other sort of platforms. But look, I'm no longer a kid. This is the way this country is politically right now. There may not be a place for a voice like mine. And that's fine. I've got no regrets. I did what I did, but I may be done. I may start tending bars or pouring coffee. I don't know what I'm going to do.
But hey, CNN's looking for Republican, since they let Rick Santorum go.
Yeah, but here's the thing. This is why, I'm so weirdly homeless. The MSNBCs and the CNNs of the world won't go near a guy like me because of the old Joe Walsh. And now Fox News and the Republicans won't touch me because I'm the new Joe Walsh, so I don't have a home.
See, I liked going after the old Joe Walsh.
I like that too.
I liked the fact that you were a lightning rod, and I did. I've told you that before. You were one of my favorite chew toys for a while, and then you found sanity, and now you're on the right path.
But yet I still am philosophically generally what I am, and you and I generally disagree on most issues, and the country needs to hear conversations where you and I see where we might have any common ground.
See, now, do you believe, as I used to, that I can sit down with anyone and I can hammer out some kind of an agreement?
Yeah.
That I believe that there is some common ground, that you don't have to surrender your values and your beliefs to get something done. But we seem to be in this world where I want 100% of everything I want, or we get nothing.
Yes, I do believe that that's still possible. It's hanging on by a thread, Rick, but I also do believe there's an audience. I believe there's an audience of Americans right now that's sick of the whole red state, blue state, whatever tribe you're in bullcrap. I think there are Americans who want to rise above the tribalism. Rick, I just think political tribalism is really destroying this country right now.
Yeah, I mean, because we've already chosen teams, it seems, and now all it's going to take is that spark. And who knows? We're an incredibly armed society. Another shooting in San Jose. In fact, 16 mass shootings in a week. We're at 231 for the year already. It's just going to take one more spark. And I don't know about where you live. Where I live, there's a free gun range, not more than a mile or two from my house. On Saturdays, you see guys, working on formations. They're training for the second apocalypse and looking forward to it. I actually know a guy who's told me he's got rice and guns buried all over this central area for when it starts, and that scares the hell out of me.
Well, but again, you and I disagree on this. It's not the gun. It's not the guns. It's what's in that guy. It's what's in their brains and their minds, and it's their attitudes, and it's their mental condition, and it's the fact that people are being primed to get violent. Again, go back to Fox News and talk radio. People are being ginned up and manipulated.
No, I agree, but I look at this guy, who did the shooting in San Jose. 5 years ago, the Department of Homeland Security, tagged him as a very disgruntled employee who had talked about killing coworkers and all kinds of stuff. And here, the guy's got an arsenal in his locker. And is it surprising that the guy went off killing people? No, it's not surprising.
But okay, but would another? What are you gonna do about that, Rick? Would another gun law have done anything?
I think, someone like that, you flag at some point, if you've got people who are
sure, and I agree with that. But who does that? Who flags him? Family, local law enforcement. How come that's not done? It's not another law. People need to do their jobs.
The Department of Homeland Security has a file on this guy from 2016 that paints him as, how did the wording go? A very disgruntled employee who has, tons of materials on bomb making, on terrorism, on manifestos.
Well, then, hello, I agree. Well, then, hello, Rick. Follow up those red flags and do something.
And that's my problem. We're how do we do that? This was predictable.
This was predictable. I would argue that January 6th was predictable.
Exactly.
Again, red flag laws help, and we've got to get the feds communicating with local law enforcement. We've got to get people in the communities, again, speaking out. And the vast majority of these mass shootings, people are aware that these shooters are trouble.
Right.
But it just seems like nobody speaks up and contacts local law enforcement.
No, because nothing can be done. I mean, what are you going to do? This guy, we see these stories all the time. Local law enforcement doesn't do anything because then you get the NRA's legal defense fund to come in and make a martyr out of the person, like the woman here in Reading, Pennsylvania. Perfect example. The woman here in Reading who took her sidearm to the 6-year-old soccer game, and parents, rightly flipped out because, oh my God, you got a gun around all these 6-year-olds. The sheriff took the gun, big to do. She got her gun back. A couple months later, her husband shot her in the head with the same gun.
There's broad support in this country, broad support, even among gun owners like me, for red flag laws and even universal background checks. But, Rick, even saying that, the bottom line is, in a free country like this, if you are a bad, troubled person, and you want to get your hand on a gun to do bad things, it's virtually impossible to stop you.
Yeah, my problem is we now have these weapons, that high-capacity magazines, these weapons that were made for war, for killing people.
Oh, have me back on.
We will most certainly do this.
And let's spend time talking.
Look, I'm not a gun grabber. I'm not a gun grabber. I got one within arm's reach because I live in a crazy area.
You have a constitutional right to defend yourself. The AR-15, you got to have me back on. The AR-15 is a wonderful firearm for my wife. It's a wonderful home defense gun for my wife. But you and I can get into that. But see, this is what I miss, Rick.
That's why I got a dog.
Talking about issues.
So I lived in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland.
Yeah.
The only time you ever saw somebody with a gun, somebody was going to die. And this is where I understand the gun culture. I live in a neighborhood now where you see somebody with a gun, they're probably going to the free gun range or participating in their militia activities, which it happens. So I understand this. I'm not a gun grabber, but at a certain point, we have to talk about how we deal with these extreme elements. And
that I agree with. That's not a gun issue. On that I agree with. Homeland Security, the FBI. We have people domestically right now that we should be flagging and all over and on top of. And that's an issue of civil liberties, and people on my side got to give a little bit on that.
Yeah. See, I'm not against the guy who wants his gun to defend his home. Get a dog, I think, is a better defense. But, look.
Both.
Okay, both.
Both.
In case you want to shoot the dog, right?
Hey, Rick, but you live out in the country. I'm not talking about you, but you're somebody who lives out in the country, and it could take local law enforcement 15, 20, 30 minutes to get where you are. Man, you got to have something right there if somebody breaks into your home.
We don't disagree on that. We don't disagree. My problem, again, it comes back down to these, when you had the right to bear arms, you had the musket. They never envisioned somebody to be able to walk into a school with a 100-round capacity magazine and just wipe it out 100 people in seconds.
Well, you have free speech, and they never envisioned the internet and Facebook and Twitter and all of this. And, oh, by the way, now we've got Republicans like Florida Governor Ron DeSantis going after free speech and the First Amendment.
We have lots to defend and lots to get to. I hope you find a home soon. I hope you continue.
I'll stay in touch, my friend. You'll be the first to know. I
like the work that you do. Like you said, we don't always agree, but I think it's important to have all voices out in the public sphere. I even defend the conservatives that I don't agree with to be on the air. So I hope you find a home, and if there's anything I can do, let me know.
Thank you, Rick Smith. You're the best, my friend. Thank you.
Good stuff, Joe. Thanks so much. Joe Walsh. Check out his podcast, F Silence. I actually like that one. Make sure you check that out, fsilence.com. Quick break. Right back to right there. Stick around. I'll mumble through.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
We all know that these storms are coming, and we're going to be prepared. We have to be ready.
Biden doubles FEMA disaster funding as NOAA forecasts another intense hurricane season. U.S. renewable energy deployment hits record pace in 2021. Plus,
we're not interested as long as it's not anything about tax increases.
Republicans reject corporate tax increases to fund major infrastructure upgrades.
All of that obstructionism and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
You got the fossil fuel mafia coming after you, man.
Don't I know it? This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, it's kind of nice to have a president who realizes that hurricane season is coming and realizes we should do something about it in advance.
Indeed it is. And yes, buckle up. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration forecasts that the 2021 Atlantic hurricane season, which starts June 1st, will again be busier than normal, but said it is unlikely to be as severe as the record-shattering season in 2020.
We'll see.
With the Atlantic hurricane season looming, President Biden on Monday announced he is doubling FEMA's emergency spending budget. Biden is making $1 billion available to states, territories, and tribes for pre-disaster mitigation and preparation for hurricanes and other extreme weather events like floods and wildfires. The order also directs NASA to develop next-generation climate data systems to better track how climate change is impacting communities. Biden announced the new funding at FEMA headquarters in Washington.
We have to be ready. When disaster strikes, we have to be there to protect and also help people recover. And so it's not about red states and blue states. You all know that. It's about having people's backs in the toughest moments that they face.
Yeah, but does he have enough paper towels to throw at the victims?
FEMA's advanced preparation matters, not just to reduce the costs of emergency response, but also long-term dislocation of residents. A new study has found that globally in 2020, more than 40 million people were pushed out of their homes, even amid a pandemic, fleeing storms, floods, wildfires, and in some cases, faces conflict. The annual report from the European nonprofit Internal Displacement Monitoring Center said that the 40 million displaced globally in 2020 was the largest number in more than a decade.
Wow.
The report underscores why the U.S. Defense Department calls the destabilizing effects of man-made climate change a security threat multiplier. Here in the U.S., the White House and congressional Republicans remain far apart on negotiations for Biden's popular American Jobs Plan to repair and upgrade the nation's crumbling infrastructure.
What a surprise.
The White House on Friday offered to cut nearly a quarter off of his original $2.25 trillion proposal, cutting funds for research, development, and U.S. manufacturing. But Politico reports Republicans have barely budged from their $568 billion counterproposal and rejected Biden's plan to lift corporate tax rates to fund the investments. Instead, Republicans want user fees like tolls, requiring working Americans to pay to build the infrastructure and then pay again to use it. But the administration says corporations are among the largest benefactors of transportation infrastructure and should pay their fair share. As Biden explained in a recent press conference,
If everything is paid for by a user fee, well then, the burden falls on working class folks who are having trouble.
What happened to the Republicans' plan to become the populist party, looking out for the little guy?
Well, a new Data for Progress poll found that 58% of voters support Democrats going it alone to pass the American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan together using budget reconciliation, which allows for a simple majority vote.
Good. They're wasting time waiting for Republicans.
After a new EPA report last week warned that climate change is already costing the U.S. billions every year in more frequent and intense extreme weather disasters, Biden also issued a new executive order requiring federal agencies to develop a comprehensive climate risk assessment and strategy to prepare for climate-related financial shocks in sectors that they regulate. The order focuses on climate impacts that pose major risks for home prices, investments, pensions, and banking, and more in ways that could destabilize major sectors of the economy. And finally, deployment of clean energy in the U.S. in 2021 is already far exceeding the pace of last year's record rate. According to the American Clean Power Association, 13 new wind projects, 15 new solar projects, and 2 battery storage projects, all utility scale, became operational during the first 3 months of 2021, a 40% increase over the same period last year before the pandemic shutdown.
Oh, just wait for Donald Trump to start taking credit for that, too. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find, follow, and share us planet-wide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Gotta tell you, a little jealous of my former state, Ohio, with their vaccine lottery. I gotta talk to Governor Wolf here and see if we can get a vaccine lottery. I'm vaccinated. Throw my hat in the ring. I'd love to win $1 million. Evidently, Wednesday, they had their first millionaire drawing, and the first one of the Vax a Million lottery. I love that. You gotta even put some good PR spin on that. But Vax a Million lottery went to a 22-year-old woman, Abigail Bugensky, from Shaker Heights, Ohio, a mechanical engineer living in Cincinnati, looking to buy a used car that day. I gotta wonder if the choices of automobiles are going to expand. And here to share some thoughts on the Vax a Million lottery, I've asked our good friend, our executive producer, and the professor, Brett Pransky, to come share some thoughts with us. Brett, thanks for taking time for us.
Always good to be here.
So, Vax a Million. Are you in the drawing?
Yeah, it wasn't me. It wasn't me. I thought I had a shot, but I tell you what, if it's not going to be me, I'm glad it went to a young person starting out, looking to get her career going. I'm interested in knowing what she bought, though. You know what I mean? I like if she found out in the middle of the day, in the middle of that transaction, I'd like to know what car she finally settled on.
maybe that's the follow-up story. But look, I'm not opposed to these ideas of incentives to get people vaccinated. Personally, I think common sense should say, hey, you should probably get vaccinated. You should probably do that. Much like I thought, wearing the mask and socially distancing and doing all those things was common sense. But if we need to incentivize it, I'm not against it.
Yeah, and I'm not either. I mean, I was torn about this initially, and many people were. The first time we heard about this, a lot of people I knew were like, I'm not sure if I'm okay with that. I'm not sure if that's what we should do. And I was kind of in that camp for a while. But after a while, and after I got over the fact that I couldn't get in line fast enough to get my vaccine, I thought about would this work? And when I thought about it as through that lens, I'm like, yeah, it would. I guarantee there are a large number of people who got vaccinated in order to get into that lottery who otherwise would not have. And if that's going to happen, then then I'm all for it.
Yeah, but I look at it as just kind of insane. We're going, so let me get this right. You're willing to get a chance, like a chance in a million to win $1 million, but the thing that's going to assuredly protect you from getting COVID, no, I'm not going to bother.
Yeah, I found that a little ironic too. I mean, I'd like you to pay me to do something good for myself. It seems a little strange. It seems a little odd. It's like, it's like asking me, I promise not to drive 140 miles an hour on the highway, put my name in a lottery for $1 million. It seems, it seems kind of weird when you look at it that way, but at the end of the day, you got to do what works. Yeah. And there are people out there who need an incentive, who don't see the world through the same lens that I see it through, and the people, in my circle see it through. And when it comes right down to it, if it gets the job done, it's about saving lives. And, you have to ask yourself, how many lives is $1 million worth? Because I guarantee this lottery saved lives.
Yeah. No, and you look at different places who've chosen different things. I look at West Virginia giving away pickup trucks. That's an incentive. He knows the room. Knows you're going to get all those guys, middle-aged white guys going, I need me a new pickup truck, heading out to go get vaccinated, so they got a shot at the truck. Louisiana, shot of booze. You got to know your room. Make the incentives suitable for the room.
Well, the thing is, I mean, when you think about some of this, I mean, to some extent, you have to think it was kind of a silly thing to spend $1 million on, because you could probably get this many people to, at least around here in Ohio, especially when you get into the rural areas of Ohio, you can probably get this many people to get vaccinated just by daring them not to, or saying that they're, calling them cowards, or saying that they're not tough enough or man enough to get a vaccine. You probably line up just as many people. But, if you don't really want to do that. So I guess you got to spend $1 million.
Well, good on Abigail. I hope she got a good car. Now, one of the funny stories, one of our Wing Nut in Review, Week in Review stories, Idaho's been a really interesting place. You've got, 18 counties now in Oregon wanting to join Idaho for a greater Idaho state. And now you see this story where evidently the governor of Idaho decided to leave the state for a day. And while he was gone, the lieutenant governor signed a mask mandate prohibition, banning people from wearing masks or allowing areas to mandate masks. While this guy was gone, he comes back, finds out what she has done, orders an executive order repealing the mask ban, and really causing one of these interesting moments there in Idaho, as you've got a Republican being challenged by an extremely right-wing, crazy Republican, and then she's filed to run against him.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting story. It's kind of like, leaving work on Friday and coming back Monday morning and seeing that you've been replaced. You come back in, you get into your office and there's a picture of somebody else's kids on your desk, and you're just like, what's going on here? So, but I mean, I find that absolutely, in terms of just Republican silliness, to be one of the better stories around. He was gone for a day and someone passed legislation under his nose. He's the governor of the state. And it's just, it's just comically right wing. It's like the thing that you would see. It's like government by the Kardashians. You know what I mean? There's always some drama, always some intrigue, always some inner fight going on. It has nothing to do with anyone else or service to the people or what's right for anybody. It's all about ploys and backstabbing and political intrigue, and it's like watching him compete for the Iron Throne. It's the craziest thing imaginable.
Yeah, well, it's bread and circus. I mean, it's just political theater at its worst.
That's right.
Speaking of political theater at its worst, did you see Matt Gaetz' speech in Georgia? Where he's basically telling the faithful there and to a rousing standing ovation, that the Second Amendment is about maintaining within the citizenry the ability to maintain an armed rebellion. He's talking about armed rebellion, Brett. He's telling people take up arms. He hopes it doesn't happen. Hopes it doesn't have to happen. But that's what we need to do. Tone deaf.
I'm sure he hopes it doesn't happen. You gotta love Matt Gaetz, and you just can't out crazy Matt Gaetz. I mean, the hysterical hairdo himself. I mean, the guy is legendary. But here's what and again, this is probably a take you haven't heard on it yet, but I'm going to go here because this is what I actually think is going on. All right, there's only a few people in the world who really know what's coming up for Matt Gaetz. All right, there's been all kinds of talk, all kinds of speculation about charges coming, about how he could end up on the wrong end of an indictment, all kinds of things. Rumor is he's done all kinds of horrible stuff. People are singing and they're talking about him. So this almost, believe it or not, looks like, revolution as a criminal defense. It seems like he's stoking all of this in order to keep himself out of jail. I mean, because I can't think of any other reason for it. Because really, there's only one thing he should be concerned about right now, and that's keeping himself out of jail. And that's honestly how I'm seeing all of this through that lens. He might really be thinking that this is his best path to stay out of jail, is to be so far, on the right in this crazy world, that there are people out there who would be willing to try to go as far as overthrow the government of the United States for him and for Donald Trump and for all the people he supports. And that might be his easiest path towards not going to prison, is if there is some kind of actual revolution.
Yeah, no, and I don't disagree with that. I mean, you look at what Trump has been able to pull off. I've said for a while now that when the Southern District of New York and all of them, all of the people in Manhattan who are going after him, when they indict him and if he goes to jail, it's just going to make him look like a martyr to the base. And that's when, who knows, as he's stoking these fears and riling people up, who knows where this leads to? Is this the beginning of what could be armed conflict?
It could potentially. Keep in mind this whole idea of, I think Trump called it Second Amendment remedies.
Right.
Because this isn't the first time we've had this kind of crazy talk about, hey, if things don't go your way, pick up a gun and shoot somebody you disagree with. I mean, this kind of talk has happened, and this particular fire has been stoked for quite some time. It just typically isn't done this directly. I mean, Matt Gaetz pretty much just came out and said it. And then after he said it, he came back with that little caveat at the end and said, hey, I hope it never happens. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, go ahead and do it. You know what I mean? It's kind of like what you would see at you hear about this white supremacist language where they drop keywords and phrases into a normal speech. They say things like lone wolf used to be the big trigger to tell people to go do things and act on their own and stuff. And it kind of felt like that. Hey, we may have to revolt against the United States government. I hope it never happens. It was almost done in a whisper.
Right.
So, I mean, it's just nutty where this is going, and it's frightening where this is going. But for a guy like Matt Gaetz, the one thing for certain is the only reason he's doing it is for his own personal self-interest.
Yeah, and when he says we, he means, well, all of you.
Yeah, you're not going to find Matt Gaetz on the battlefield.
Yeah, just like you didn't see Trump actually leading the insurrection and leading the people to the Capitol like he said he would. He'll be at the back.
Go with you. Right.
He was there in spirit.
But if you did see Matt Gaetz on the battlefield, he's probably not going to wear a helmet, first of all, because, that beautiful hairdo of his. And that hairdo would probably stand up about 6-8 inches above anything else on the battlefield. So it'd be real easy to spot.
Yeah, there you go. I think you'd find him behind Marjorie Taylor Greene's skirt.
Probably.
Because I don't know if you saw the picture of the two of them. I think she could whip his behind. But I'm actually going, hey, I'd like to see the two of them on the ticket come 2024. Because look, one of two things. One, finally we wake up to the reality of how absurd the Republican Party has become, or they actually get into power and do all of the crazy stuff that we know they're going to do.
Well, that is actually closer to a reality than most people think. I'm not willing to go so far as to say Gates Green 2024. I mean, that would be a new level of lunacy, even if there was such a thing. We're having to build new levels of lunacy each day, it seems. But the idea that people of this variety can find themselves in real power is pretty realistic. I mean, think about the possibility, and it's, some people are calling it a probability. I think it's a possibility, but one we can stave off, is that the Republicans could take the House in 2022.
Yep.
That's a realistic possibility, especially with all the changes in seats per state and things like that. There's a real possibility that the Republicans could win the House back in 2022. And if they do, it is not outside the realm of possibility, or it's not even unlikely necessarily, that Donald Trump would dump Kevin McCarthy and just tell the base or tell the Republican Party, hey, make Marjorie Taylor Greene Speaker of the House, or I'm not going to run in 2024. It would be that simple. If he were to say that, or if he were to make that statement, and I have no reason to think he wouldn't, there is nothing that the Republicans have shown us over the past several years that gives me any indication that they wouldn't just fall in line.
No, and that's a scary thing. I knew where you were going, but and he would do that simply out of spite over the fact that the Democrats removed her from her committees, which again I think was a mistake. But it's done in water under the bridge. But imagine her as Speaker of the House. I mean, what would we get done?
I have no idea what kinds of things would happen if something like that were to happen. Because I mean, we've discussed, her qualifications previously. This idea that I think for any public servant, you need a servant's heart, you need an active mind. And one thing that we're seeing from this particular side of Republican politics is neither. Some of them are relatively bright folks, and they're accustomed to manipulating people and things like that, but it's entirely self-serving. But I haven't seen anyone in this entire wing of the GOP that actually has an interest of doing what's right for American people. I see a lot of people interested in their own position, their own power, their own fame, getting into the news cycle, saying something today that is more controversial than what they said yesterday in order to get more clicks and more views and anything. But I mean, it's bad reality TV, but I don't see anything that gives me any inclination that there would be anything good for America, if something like that happened, or even any desire to do anything good for America.
No, and to highlight that point of having to come out with the more extreme and more crazy comments. I've been looking for Lauren Boebert. Where did she go? She has fallen completely off the crazy train because we're so focused on Gates and Green.
Yeah, you can't out crazy Gates and Green. I mean, they just suck up all the oxygen in the crazy tent. I mean, there's nothing. I mean, think about the things that they do and the things that they say. Gates, I think it was earlier today, was literally just out loud talking about revolution against the American government. Marjorie Taylor Greene said something. Actually, believe it or not, she said something the other day that I actually agreed with. She kind of said the other day that the America First agenda, and specifically her and Matt Gaetz, are taking over the Republican Party. Said it out loud. I'm sure her colleagues love to hear it. But she basically said that the Republican Party belongs to them now. And the thing is, I don't think she was wrong.
No, I don't.
I don't disagree with her. I really think she is the de facto leader of the Republican Party, in terms of there's never anyone else out there who's saying anything, that we're listening to. She literally, between her and Matt Gaetz, they suck up all the oxygen in the room, all the attention in the room, and no one else can do anything. And so, yeah, they do. They own the Republican Party.
Yeah, but this is one of those things, and I go back to my position on the Democrats removing her from her committee assignments. That was a Republican problem. They should have had to deal with it, and the fact that they didn't, I think, highlights your point of she's got more power than even they know. Yeah,
and that was a mistake, and you were right to say so at the time. And actually, Democrats here in Ohio, in our state house, are making the same mistake now with our corrupt former Speaker of the House, Larry Householder. Is they're proposing legislation to get rid of him, and it's not what they should do. It's the other party's problem. You should make them deal with their own issues, and if you don't, then you're going to end up with something like this. We removed Marjorie Taylor Greene from her committees, and what has she done? All right, she has no time to do. I mean, she has all the time in the world to do, all kinds of damage because she's got no responsibility. She's got no job. She's got a paycheck, in a no-show gig. So what is she going to do? She's just going to spend all of her time, upping the crazy, which is precisely what she's done. And, and it's something we all just got to deal with now.
Yeah. Jet setting around the country, giving speeches to rabid, literally rabid supporters, and stoking that violent tendency. I don't have great hope for the Republican Party at this point. We better get the Democrats in line some way quick. I also wanted to get your thoughts on the story broke earlier today that some federal prosecutors in Brooklyn are looking at several Ukrainian officials who evidently helped Rudy Giuliani, do some of the stuff in 2020 to discredit Biden, the laptop stuff. I'm looking at Giuliani. I'm looking at that cavalcade of crazy and the carnival of attorneys there. And are we ever going to get to the bottom of just how much stuff that Giuliani has been involved in? I mean, do you think we'll ever get the 18 devices? Do you think we'll ever figure out just how far America's mayor has fallen into the depths of greed and insanity?
I think we will. I think it never happens fast enough. And again, from Mueller, on down, none of these things have ever moved fast enough for the American people. We want our answers. We want them now. These kinds of answers have been dragging out there forever. So what we're hearing is kind of a soft confirmation of what we already knew. We knew that there were people, they say Ukrainian, but every time you hear the word Ukrainian officials, just substitute the word Russia.
Right.
Because that's what's actually going on. These are, Ukrainian folks loyal to Putin and Russia, feeding disinfo that Giuliani is then turning around and feeding to all kinds of people, including, members of Congress. This is pretty much the same origin for a lot of the stuff we've heard from Senator Ron Johnson, some of these more far right-wing folks in the Senate. And, and there was a ton of this material. It was all, orchestrated and planned and delivered. And Rudy just ate it up because he was probably told to. And again, the driving force behind this was, and always will be Trump. Rudy went and did what he was told. Now, that said, he has enough agency to make a decision on how he wants to handle himself and how he wants to represent the president or himself or anybody else. So I don't, I'm not letting him off the hook for any of this stuff but we are starting to learn, more details about things that we've pretty much always suspected, that this was the origin.
Yeah, no, and again, it all comes back to, as you pointed out, all back to Trump. Lastly, I wanted to get your thoughts on, we've watched what's going on in Arizona I guess we're going to recount the recount. And I guess they didn't find any bamboo fibers. Sad face there. I guess this insanity from Arizona is now moving to Wisconsin as a couple of legislators there have hired some retired policemen to probe the 2020 elections. They're going to use taxpayer dollars to investigate the steal. And I guess they're going to have several $1 million in taxpayer funded money going to these former policemen to dig deep into the steal. Thoughts?
It doesn't get a whole lot sillier than the Arizona Republican Party. But I will tell you this: if the black lights and the ballot viewing machines and whatever, if these come to Wisconsin, I guarantee you they're going to buy the bamboo in advance. All right. If they didn't find any bamboos because they didn't plan well enough to buy some and bring it with them. And I guarantee you in Wisconsin, they will have bamboo. All right. So they're going to keep going with this until they find something that they can latch onto, or in most cases, it probably won't even find anything. They'll just create something. They say never let the truth get in the way of a good story. This is that. They're going to tell a good story that people want to hear and something that people can get fired up about. And they're just going to keep going and going and going until they get that opportunity. And no people of real, substance or power on the right, people who have the means to make it stop, None of them will. And that's the real shame behind it. And that's what the history books are going to talk about when this part of our history is written.
I hope you're right. I would love to see in 100 years what is written about this era, but sadly I'll be long gone by then. But Brett, as always, I appreciate your insight and thoughts. Thanks so much.
Hey, thanks for having me. Good
stuff. Brett Pransky, our executive producer and the professor of the program. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1882. That was the day that John Muir, a Scottish-American conservationist, founded the Sierra Club in San Francisco, California. The Sierra Club's purpose was to explore, enjoy, and protect the wild places of the earth. Today, the organization has more than 1 million members and is one of the most well-known environmental organizations on the planet. The labor movement and the environmental movements in the United States have not always had an easy relationship. Too often, politicians and the media have framed policy decisions as a choice between good jobs and a clean environment. But during the 1990s, some environmentalists and unionists began to break down this divide. Both groups opposed the North American Free Trade Agreement, arguing it would have a negative impact on both jobs and the environment. During the massive protests of the World Trade Organization in 1999 in Seattle, labor protested alongside environmental activists. One memorable tagline to come out of the protest was, "Turtles love Teamsters, Teamsters love turtles." Then, in 2006, the Sierra Club partnered with the United Steelworkers to launch the Blue-Green Alliance. The effort joins together blue-collar workers with green environmental justice groups. The partnership seeks to supply policy and education about sustainable job growth in fields such as clean energy. Multiple environmental groups and unions, including the American Federation of Teachers, the Communication Workers of America, the Service Employees International Union, and the United Auto Workers, have signed on to the effort. But it's not always easy to keep the two causes united. In 2012, the Laborers Union left the alliance due to disagreements over the Keystone XL pipeline. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Again, I still want Governor Wolf to come up with I think we need a vaccination plan, a lottery, if you will. Because, look, I like the incentives. And maybe there's a chance I'm going to win $1 million. Never in a million years. But again, I hope folks will get vaccinated. You know, the sooner the better. The sooner we get to the other side of this. The sad story of the day, and I don't know how sad it is because it's one of those things that I've been saying for a long time. I hope the people who are out there pushing this poison are the ones who are most affected by it. Evidently, a Denver sheriff's deputy, former Marine, who was 33-year-old guy. On the sheriff's department for 7 years. He had recently, I guess, been appointed to the vice president of the Denver Sheriff Latino organization. He was posting all kinds of anti-vaxxer stuff, all kinds of, we don't need vaccines, reposting stuff of, I have an immune system. I don't care if you've had your vaccine, all kinds of weird stuff, saying how tough he was. Well, he died Wednesday of the coronavirus because, hey, he has an immune system. Evidently didn't work. And this is one of those things where I go back to no joy in this, but there is a little bit of poetic justice because you got to wonder, how many people see these messages? How many people are influenced by idiotic social media posts? And I get tons of them sent my way all the time. But how many people many people listen to this stuff? I know a couple, a couple of anti-vax women who have said, no, I don't want to get the blood clot. I'm going, 20 out of 7 million people got it. Your chances are slim, but your chance of getting the virus are better. It's a trade-off. But, so I'm in favor of whatever incentives we can do to make sure folks do get vaccinated, because the federal government came out today and said employers can mandate that people get vaccinated. So it's going to be interesting to see how the ACLU, who will fight it, I'm sure, and a number of right-wing groups jump into the middle. Going to be interesting to see how that plays out in our courts. Mandating that you have to protect yourself. Very weird times. Anyway, I hope everyone has a safe, happy, healthy Memorial Day weekend. We will not be in on Monday, observing the holiday. I hope you have a good time, time with your family, time to recharge and remember what the holiday is about. If you missed any of today's program, make sure you check out the podcast at thericksmithshow.com. Get the app on your smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.